I would like to announce here today, us Epstein survivors have been discussing creating our own list. We know the names.
Jeffrey Epstein's survivors have finally taken matters into their own hands, exposing names hidden for years. The powerful, once untouchable, are now under fire. Even Congress is scrambling to keep these files sealed, and once you hear what's inside, you'll understand why the system tried so hard to bury it. The moment everything changed when survivors said no more. On September 3, 2025, something unprecedented occurred on the steps of the United States Capitol. 8 survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's horrific crimes stood before the world to make a powerful announcement that would shake the foundations of our government's handling of one of the most notorious criminal cases in modern history. Lisa Phillips, one of the survivors, stepped up to the microphone and made a statement that would reverberate through the halls of power.
I would like to announce here today, us Epstein survivors have been discussing creating our own list. We know the names. Many of us were abused by them. Now together as survivors, we will confidentially compile the names we all know, who were regularly in the Epstein world. And it will be done by survivors and for survivors.
This wasn't a leak. This was a declaration of war against a system that has consistently failed to provide justice and transparency. The story begins not with a leaked list, but with a systematic failure of our justice system that has left survivors feeling abandoned and powerless. Jeffrey Epstein, the financier who operated a vast sex trafficking network, died by suicide in 2019 while awaiting trial. His associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, was convicted in 2021 and sentenced to 20 years in prison, but for many survivors, this felt like only the tip of the iceberg. What makes this case so uniquely frustrating is the sheer scope of Epstein's connections to powerful individuals across politics, business, entertainment, and academia. Court documents, flight logs from his private jet dubbed the Lolita Express, and his infamous Black Book of Contacts have revealed associations with figures including former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, and countless other celebrities and politicians. However, it's crucial to understand that being named in these documents doesn't imply wrongdoing. Many were simply social acquaintances or people Epstein name-dropped to inflate his status. But here's where the story gets particularly complex and infuriating for survivors. Despite all these connections, despite the mountains of evidence, and despite years of investigations, very few people beyond Epstein and Maxwell have faced any consequences. The US Department of Justice released a memo in July 2025 stating that no client list exists and that no evidence was found of blackmail schemes involving prominent figures. This memo effectively closed the door on further investigations, leaving survivors feeling betrayed and ignored. The September 3rd press conference wasn't just about announcing a list, it was about survivors taking back control of their narrative after years of being sidelined by bureaucratic delays and political maneuvering. Marina Lacerda, identified as Minor Victim 1 in Epstein's 2019 federal indictment, spoke publicly for the first time about being recruited at age 14.
A girl saw me that, I was struggling and I needed to make meets ends, and she was like, hey, I have a gig for you.
What did she say the gig was?
She had said that, I was going to massage somebody, and there wasn't much specifics, but I wasn't expecting what led on to that day.
Lacerda described Epstein's New York mansion as a revolving door with up to 10 girls daily, painting a picture of an industrial-scale operation that went far beyond what most people understand about the scope of these crimes.
And how old are you at the time?
I just turned 14.
After you went the first time, you give the massage. Who gives you $300?
The first time, the girl did. He handed it to her, and she gave it to me. I went there a couple more times with her, but then I went on my own because he asked me to come.
The emotional weight of these testimonies cannot be overstated. These women, now adults, have carried the trauma of their abuse for decades while watching their abusers' associates continue to live their lives without consequence. Anuska de Giorgio, a British model who was abused by both Epstein and Maxwell, criticized Maxwell's transfer to a lower security prison, calling it a holiday camp. But perhaps the most emotionally charged moment came from Haley Robson, a registered Republican who directly challenged President Trump's dismissal of the case as a hoax.
Take us inside. What was it like during that meeting?
Oh, it was absolutely surreal and empowering. It was the most important moment of my life. All of us survivors sat around the table with the congresswomen and just shared stories. And a few of them told us about domestic violence or rape or things that happened to them in their past. And we just all passed around tissues and cried together. It was just a powerful moment.
The political dimension of this story is equally complex. The survivors' announcement came just one day after the House Oversight Committee released 33,295 pages of Epstein-related documents, but critics immediately pointed out that 97% of these documents were already public, with only 3% containing new information. This pattern of releasing already public information while withholding potentially damaging materials has become a source of intense frustration. Representatives Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna have been pushing a bipartisan discharge petition to force a House vote on a bill requiring the DOJ to release all Epstein files within 30 days. As of September 3rd, they had secured 212 Democrats and 4 Republicans, needing just 2 more Republican signatures to reach the 218 required for a floor vote. However, House Speaker Mike Johnson has opposed the petition, calling it moot and favoring the ongoing Oversight Committee investigation. This resistance from GOP leadership has frustrated even Republicans like Massie, who see it as protecting Trump rather than seeking truth. The Trump administration's handling of the Epstein files has been particularly controversial. During his 2024 campaign, Trump promised to release the files as part of his transparency agenda, but once in office, his tune changed dramatically.
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more, and nobody's ever satisfied. From what I understand, I could check, but from what I understand, thousands of pages of documents have been given. But it's really a Democrat hoax because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success that we've had as a nation since I've been president.
This dismissive attitude toward the survivors' demands has only intensified their resolve. Lisa Phillips emphasized that the survivors list would be compiled by survivors for survivors, with no one else involved. But she also expressed serious safety concerns about making such a list public, noting the potential for lawsuits and retaliation. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene offered to read names from the survivors list on the House floor using congressional immunity, which would shield her from defamation lawsuits.
They want to give me a list. I will walk in that Capitol on the House floor and I'll say every damn name that abused these women. I can do that for them, and I'd be proud to do it.
The reality is if they try to release that list, they're going to be sued into homelessness. They will be attacked, they will have death threats. And so what my colleague Marjorie Taylor Greene volunteered to do, and I've volunteered to do as well, is to read that list on the floor of the House of Representatives, because our founders put into the Constitution speech or debate immunity, which says that we can't be prosecuted for what we say on the floor of the House.
The question of what names might be on this survivors list has generated intense speculation. Based on the extensive research and court documents that have been released, potential names could include many of the same figures who have already appeared in various Epstein-related documents. These include political figures like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, business leaders like Bill Gates and Les Wexner, academics like Stephen Hawking and Larry Summers, and celebrities like David Copperfield and Kevin Spacey. However, it's crucial to understand that inclusion in the survivors list wouldn't necessarily indicate criminal activity. The list is described as naming those regularly in the Epstein world, which could include enablers, facilitators, or even just frequent social contacts. The survivors have emphasized their focus on accountability for all those who enabled Epstein's crimes, not just direct participants. What makes this situation so explosive is not just the potential names on the list, but what it represents about our justice system's failures. The Epstein Victims Compensation Program paid out $121 to $125 million to approximately 150 survivors by 2021, but many survivors feel that financial compensation without accountability is hollow justice. The survivors' decision to compile their own list represents a fundamental breakdown in trust between victims and the institutions supposed to protect them. Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent accusers who died by suicide in April 2025, had long pushed for transparency. Her death underscored the ongoing toll this case continues to take on survivors. What actually happened on September 3rd, 2025 was far more significant than a simple leak. It was a declaration of independence from a system that has consistently failed to deliver justice. The survivors aren't just threatening to name names, they're challenging the entire power structure that allowed Epstein to operate with impunity for decades. The explosive potential. What happens when survivors name names? The announcement from Epstein survivors that they're compiling their own list of associates has sent shockwaves through the corridors of power, and for good reason. The potential consequences of such a release could fundamentally reshape American politics, destroy careers, and expose a network of complicity that extends far beyond what most people imagine. But the survivors face a deadly serious dilemma: seeking justice while potentially putting their own lives at risk. To understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with, we need to examine the documented connections that have already been revealed through years of court proceedings and investigations. The unsealed documents from Virginia Giuffre's 2015 defamation lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell have already revealed approximately 150 names of Epstein associates, but these represent just the tip of the iceberg. Donald Trump's name appears throughout Epstein-related documents, including flight logs showing he flew on Epstein's jet in 1997, and Epstein's black book listing 14 phone numbers for Trump. The relationship between the two men was well documented during the 1990s and early 2000s, with Trump famously telling New York Magazine in 2002, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." However, Trump has consistently denied any wrongdoing and claims he had a falling out with Epstein around 2007, allegedly banning him from Mar-a-Lago after Epstein harassed a member's teenage daughter. A disputed 2003 birthday book entry, allegedly from Trump to Epstein, featuring a crude drawing and the note, "We have certain things in common, Jeffrey," has been strongly denied by Trump, who has sued the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion over its publication. Bill Clinton's connections to Epstein are equally well documented, with flight logs showing he took at least 26 trips on Epstein's private jet between 2002 and 2003. Clinton's spokesperson has stated that he knows nothing about the terrible crimes Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to, and that his jet trips were for foundation work. Importantly, flight logs show no evidence that Clinton ever visited Epstein's Little St. James Island. Prince Andrew's case is perhaps the most legally significant, as he settled Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit in 2022 for an undisclosed sum after she alleged he sexually abused her when she was 17. Johanna Sjoberg also testified that Andrew touched her breast during a 2001 photo session at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. Andrew was stripped of his military titles and public duties by Queen Elizabeth II in 2022, but the potential fallout from a survivors list extends far beyond these already known figures. Business leaders like Bill Gates, who met with Epstein multiple times after his 2008 conviction, could face renewed scrutiny. Melinda Gates has cited her disgust with her ex-husband's Epstein ties as a factor in their 2021 divorce. Les Wexner, the former CEO of Victoria's Secret parent company L Brands, had the closest financial relationship with Epstein, giving him power of attorney over his assets from the 1980s to 2007. Wexner stepped down as CEO in 2020 amid scrutiny over his Epstein connections and continues to face civil lawsuits from victims who allege he enabled Epstein's abuse. The legal implications of releasing such a list are staggering. If the survivors go public with their compilation, they could face defamation lawsuits from powerful individuals with the resources to wage lengthy legal battles. This is precisely why Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie have offered to read the names on the House floor, where they would be protected by congressional immunity.
The reality is, if they try to release that list, they're going to be sued into homelessness. They will be attacked, they will have death threats. And so what my colleague Marjorie Taylor Greene volunteered to do, and I've volunteered to do as well, is to read that list on the floor of the House of Representatives, because our founders put into the Constitution speech or debate immunity, which says that we can't be prosecuted for what we say on the floor of the House.
But the survivors face an even more dire concern than lawsuits: their physical safety. Lisa Phillips has expressed genuine fear about the potential consequences of naming powerful individuals, noting that these are people with the resources and connections to retaliate against those who threaten to expose them. The tragic death of Virginia Giuffre by suicide in April 2025 serves as a stark reminder of the toll this case continues to take on survivors. Giuffre had been one of the most vocal advocates for transparency and accountability, and her death has only strengthened other survivors' resolve to continue the fight for justice. The political ramifications of releasing such a list could be catastrophic for figures across the political spectrum. Trump's dismissal of the Epstein case as a Democrat hoax has already alienated some survivors, particularly Haley Robson, who as a registered Republican directly challenged the president's characterization.
I am a Republican. I voted for you. Don't do that. Party affiliation should never matter. The whole purpose of me pointing out that I was a Republican is because I knew exactly what this would bring. I knew exactly the digs and, they must be Democrat, they must be on this side. This is not a political war. This is about young women that were molested and abused and then lied to, gaslit, and had their trauma weaponized on them for political gain.
The survivors' compilation of their own list represents something unprecedented in American political scandals. Victims taking control of their own narrative after being failed by every institution that was supposed to protect them. The Department of Justice's July 2025 memo stating that no client list exists and no further investigations are warranted has been met with skepticism from both survivors and lawmakers. Attorney Brad Edwards, who represents over 100 Epstein survivors, has noted that this would be the first survivor-led effort to document associates and enablers. The fact that survivors feel compelled to take this step themselves speaks to their complete loss of faith in the official justice system. The potential names on such a list could extend far beyond those already known. Court documents and flight logs have revealed connections to celebrities like David Copperfield, Kevin Spacey, and Chris Tucker, academics like Stephen Hawking and Larry Summers, and business figures like Leon Black and Jess Staley. But the survivors have made it clear that their focus isn't just on celebrities and politicians. They're targeting the entire network that enabled Epstein's crimes. This could include figures like Sarah Kellen and Nadia Marcinkova, Epstein's assistants who were named in his 2008 plea deal as potential co-conspirators but received immunity. The international implications are equally significant. Jean-Luc Brunel, the French modeling agent who died by suicide in 2022 while awaiting trial for sexual assault and trafficking charges, was alleged to have supplied models to Epstein through his MC2 agency. Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, visited Epstein's properties over 30 times and had business ties through investments. The survivors list could also expose the financial networks that supported Epstein's operations. JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank have already paid over $365 million in settlements for facilitating Epstein's accounts, but the survivors may have additional information about other financial enablers. What makes this situation particularly explosive is the timing. The survivors' announcement came just as the bipartisan discharge petition led by Representatives Massey and Karner was gaining momentum, with 212 signatures already secured and only needing 6 more to force a House vote. The threat of a survivors list being released could provide the additional pressure needed to push reluctant Republicans to sign on to the petition. However, House Speaker Mike Johnson's opposition to the petition, calling it moot and a hostile act to the administration, suggests that GOP leadership is actively working to prevent full disclosure. This resistance only reinforces the survivors' belief that the official channels have been compromised. The psychological impact on the survivors themselves cannot be understated. Marina Lacerda has spoken about how the government possesses documents that contain details of her abuse that even she doesn't remember, and how access to these files could help her heal.
So he would see me, I'd say 2-3 times a week in the beginning, because when he has somebody new in his life, he likes to see them a lot. So I went there a whole bunch of times, and it led to, unfortunately, he forced me to have sex with him, basically. I really had no choice.
You would describe it as...
The survivors have emphasized that they're not seeking pity, but demanding accountability. Their decision to compile their own list represents a last resort after years of being stonewalled by the very institutions that should have been advocating for them. The media response to any release of such a list would be unprecedented. The already intense coverage of Epstein-related document releases pales in comparison to what would happen if survivors began naming specific individuals they allege were involved in or enabled the abuse. Social media platforms would be flooded with speculation, conspiracy theories, and potentially dangerous misinformation. The international diplomatic consequences could also be severe. Prince Andrew's settlement already damaged the British royal family's reputation, and additional revelations about foreign leaders or dignitaries could strain diplomatic relationships. But perhaps most importantly, the survivors list could serve as a catalyst for broader reforms in how we handle cases involving powerful perpetrators. The 2008 plea deal that allowed Epstein to serve just 13 months under a lenient work release program while granting immunity to co-conspirators has been widely criticized as a miscarriage of justice. The survivors' actions could force a reckoning with how wealth and power have historically shielded abusers from consequences. The system's secrets: why the government won't tell the truth. The final piece of this complex puzzle reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire Epstein saga, the systematic effort by government institutions to limit transparency and accountability. After diving deep into hundreds of pages of documents, congressional testimonies, and survivor accounts, a clear pattern emerges of institutional protection that extends far beyond partisan politics and into the very foundation of how power operates in America. The Department of Justice's handling of the Epstein files represents one of the most significant transparency failures in recent memory. Despite housing approximately 300 gigabytes of investigative materials, including witness interviews, search affidavits, and thousands of images and videos, the DOJ has released only a fraction of these materials, and much of what has been released was already public. The July 2025 DOJ memo that declared no client list exists and no further releases were warranted was the culmination of what survivors and lawmakers see as a systematic cover-up. This memo directly contradicted Attorney General Pam Bondi's earlier claims in February 2025 that a client list was sitting on my desk and that full, unredacted files were coming. The timing of this reversal is particularly suspicious. Trump had campaigned on promises to release the Epstein files as part of his transparency agenda, building expectations among his base that explosive revelations were imminent. When those revelations failed to materialize and the DOJ instead declared the matter closed, it created a crisis of credibility that continues to reverberate. A hidden camera video released by James O'Keefe in September 2025 captured DOJ Deputy Chief Joseph Schnitt allegedly stating that redactions were made to redact every Republican while leaving Democrats exposed, and that Maxwell's transfer to a lower security prison was a benefit to keep her mouth shut. While Schnitt later claimed he was misquoted, the video fueled accusations of partisan bias in the handling of the files. The institutional resistance to transparency extends beyond just the DOJ. House Speaker Mike Johnson's opposition to the bipartisan discharge petition that would force release of all files has frustrated even members of his own party. Johnson called the petition inartfully drafted and a hostile act to the administration, effectively working to protect the very secrecy that survivors are fighting to end. The reasons given for this resistance reveal the complex web of interests at stake. The DOJ cites victim privacy as the primary concern, noting that files contain sensitive information about 250-plus underage victims. While protecting victims is certainly important, survivors themselves have repeatedly stated they want transparency with appropriate redactions of their identities. This quote from a survivor reveals the tragic reality. Even politicians who privately support transparency feel they cannot publicly advocate for it due to political pressures and fears of what might be exposed. The DOJ also claims that the files contain over 10,000 images and videos of child sexual abuse material that cannot be released publicly. However, this doesn't explain why witness testimonies, financial records, and other non-graphic materials continue to be withheld or heavily redacted. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of the government's resistance is what it suggests about the scope of Epstein's network. The fact that only Epstein and Maxwell faced criminal charges despite evidence of a vast trafficking operation involving numerous enablers and facilitators points to a deliberate decision to limit prosecutions. The 2008 plea deal that allowed Epstein to avoid federal charges while granting immunity to potential co-conspirators remains one of the most controversial aspects of the case. This deal, brokered by Alexander Acosta, who later served as Trump's labor secretary, has been criticized as protecting powerful figures at the expense of justice for victims. The banking sector's complicity in Epstein's operations has been well documented, but largely unpunished. JP Morgan Chase paid $290 million in settlements in 2023 for facilitating Epstein's accounts, while Deutsche Bank settled for $75 million. Yet no banking executives faced criminal charges, despite evidence that these institutions continued doing business with Epstein even after his 2008 conviction. Jess Staley, the former Barclays CEO who maintained close contact with Epstein post-2008, faced regulatory fines and a banking ban but avoided prosecution. This pattern of financial settlements without criminal accountability has become a hallmark of how the system handles cases involving elite networks. The international dimensions of the cover-up are equally troubling. Prince Andrew's settlement with Virginia Giuffre effectively ended legal proceedings that could have exposed more details about Epstein's international operations. Jean-Luc Brunel's death by suicide in 2022 while awaiting trial eliminated another potential source of information about Epstein's European connections. The psychological toll of this institutional failure on survivors cannot be overstated.
Would anybody say that they feel that they're at the point of being healed?
Nobody can go through what we went through and ever be over it. You don't get over over it. You just learn healthier coping mechanisms that help you get through the triggers, that help you get through the depression, the sleepless nights, the nightmares. I'm 48 years old and my abuse started at the age of 17. So it's a long time. It's a long time to have this information and keep it secret because you're scared, and I was scared.
This testimony reveals the decades-long burden survivors have carried while watching their abusers' associates continue to live freely. The death of Virginia Giuffre by suicide in April 2025 serves as a tragic reminder of the ongoing cost of this systemic failure. The Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) process has been deliberately obstructed, with attorneys representing approximately 50 survivors receiving a response deadline of November 2027 for requests filed in January 2025. This 3-year delay is clearly designed to outlast the current administration and avoid political accountability. The September 2025 releases by the House Oversight Committee, while containing over 33,000 pages, were criticized by both parties as containing mostly already public information. Representative Robert Garcia noted that 97% of the documents were previously available, with only 3% containing potentially new information. The pattern of releasing meaningless documents while withholding substantive materials has become a deliberate strategy to create the appearance of transparency while maintaining secrecy. Even the much-hyped release of jail surveillance footage that resolved the missing minute from Epstein's death showed nothing unusual, serving more as a distraction than genuine disclosure. The political calculations behind this resistance are complex but revealing. Trump's shift from promising transparency during his campaign to dismissing the issue as a Democrat hoax once in office demonstrates how political self-interest overrides justice.
Even if you look at D.C. right now, D.C., it's a totally safe zone. It's called a safe zone. That's a term. It's a term of art. It's a safe zone because it's very safe. You can walk down the street now and nothing's going to happen. No crime, no murders, no nothing. Because we had a lot of problems with certain places.
This deflection to discussing DC crime statistics, when asked about the Epstein files, reveals the administration's determination to avoid the topic entirely. The institutional protection extends beyond any single political party. The fact that neither the Trump nor Biden administrations prioritized releasing these files suggests a bipartisan consensus to protect powerful figures. This isn't about Republican versus Democrat, it's about elite protection versus accountability. The survivors' decision to compile their own list represents a fundamental breakdown of faith in American institutions. When victims of heinous crimes feel compelled to seek justice outside official channels, because those channels have been compromised, it signals a crisis in our democratic system.
I'm looking for transparency. I'm looking for this bill to be passed.
I think signing the bill is mandatory to start our healing process.
This simple statement from a survivor encapsulates the core issue. Transparency isn't just about satisfying public curiosity, it's about allowing victims to heal by knowing that their abusers and enablers have been held accountable. The broader implications for American democracy are staggering. If powerful individuals can operate criminal networks with impunity, protected by institutional cover-ups that span multiple administrations, then the rule of law becomes meaningless for ordinary citizens. The Epstein case has become a symbol of this two-tiered justice system, where wealth and connections provide immunity from consequences. The survivors' courage in standing up to this system, despite personal risks, represents one of the most significant challenges to elite impunity in modern American history. Their willingness to compile their own list, knowing they could face lawsuits, death threats, and other retaliation, demonstrates the depth of their commitment to justice.
And when we're done with this, there is going to be a totally new generation of women that are not to be played with.
Thank you all so much. I know this is not easy.
This powerful conclusion from the survivors' press conference encapsulates their determination to ensure that future generations won't face the same institutional failures that allowed their abuse to continue unchecked. The question now is whether the survivors will follow through on their threat to release their list, and whether doing so will finally break through the wall of institutional protection that has shielded Epstein's network for so long. The bipartisan discharge petition continues to gain momentum, needing only a few more signatures to force a House vote, but Speaker Johnson's resistance suggests that even this legislative avenue may be blocked. What's clear is that the survivors have already succeeded in exposing the fundamental corruption of our justice system. Their courage has revealed that when institutions fail, ordinary citizens must step forward to demand accountability, regardless of the personal cost. Whether this leads to meaningful reform or continued cover-ups will determine not just the fate of the Epstein case, but the future of justice in America. Enjoying the content? Make sure to check out the suggested videos by clicking the cards on your screen.